Hello everyone and welcome to Hairenik Media's Summer Digest. Before we get started, I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever you follow Hairenik Media. We're here today with our Yerevan correspondent, Nare Navasardian. Nare, the last time we spoke was in the aftermath of what was the worst instance of police brutality against peaceful demonstrators in likely the history of the Third Republic. I want to go back to that day, talk about the fallout, the reactions from international monitors like Reporters Without Borders, as well as local human rights groups. Take us back to that day, tell us what you witnessed, and let's talk about the fallout of all of that.
June 12th, we were at the protest starting from, I think, 3:30. But at the time when the grenades went off, I was just a little bit further and deeper in the Lovers Park. And it really caught me by surprise because the sound, it was so loud and people started panicking, especially women and children, and they started, moving away, and they fired the stun grenades directly into the park. And a lot of the people in the park were not even protesters, not even a part of anything. They were just, I was on a bench and the people sitting next to me, they were just a family. And they were like, what's going on? And yeah, it was scary. And they just kept shooting the stun grenades, even though already, after a couple of them, nobody was trying to advance. And from the beginning, these were peaceful protesters. Nothing much was going on that would justify the use of this particular special forces. But I think this was just we have reason enough, it is reasonable to assume that this was just a direct order from Nikol Pashinyan, because a number of organizations, human rights organizations that did reports, for example, the Helsinki Committee, they mentioned that from the drone footage you can see the head of the police, Arm Hovhannisyan, who's talking to the head of the military police forces and then gesturing in the direction of the park. And then right after that, we see the stun grenades being fired in this exact location. So this was just a direct order and a direct decision. And even though we have this precedent of when Nikol Pashinyan in 2018 was leading protesters, again, stun grenades were fired, but not 20 plus, but I think 8. And the deputy head of the police of the time, Yerevan, was recently, I think a few months ago, was charged with this. And but apparently this case did not really have an effect on this. The message is clear that if you use these grenades to the benefit of Nikol Pashinyan, then it's all fine. And if you use it against, then you will be prosecuted. So, yeah, we have seen a number of reports. Tatoyan Foundation also put out a report. First of all, the use of stun grenades was not justified. Second of all, even if it were, they were used illegally, because you need to have large 2.5 meters of distance if you're going to use this type of stun grenade. And you should never fire it directly at people. And it was very gory, I saw people running around seeking help. And also, they didn't have an ambulance, even though clearly they knew they were going to use this special measure. And
I believe there was only one ambulance in the entire vicinity, which, obviously they were totally overwhelmed. We interviewed one of the protesters who has a life-altering injury, almost losing his entire hand. He had to have multiple fingers amputated, and it's still a question of whether he'll even be able to use the ones that they did not amputate. Reporters Without Borders, I think we should draw attention to their statement. They called the firing of stun grenades into the directly at reporters filming these events appalling. They didn't put any veneer over what happened. There were media workers injured, and our own videographer, was narrowly missed being hit. So pretty significant. Amnesty International has called for an investigation by the authorities into this use of force, but the government has really dug in. They're defending it, and as you mentioned, despite the fact that a police chief during the times of the previous administration, Sir Sarkisian's presidency, was just convicted for having his forces deploy less stun grenades. Now, this is apparently kosher to do when it's against the political rivals of Nikol Pashinyan, despite the fact that these were peaceful crowds and they were men, women, and children. When I saw the images from our studio in Boston of what was happening around you and the direct firing of the stun grenades into the crowds, all I could think back to was the police crackdown on demonstrations in Iraq when they actually fired tear gas canisters, not at the ground as they're supposed to be fired or in a wide area, but actually directly into the heads of people, killing some, leaving others with skull fractures. And it was quite shocking to see this happen in Armenia. But it also seemed to have delivered a quite stunning message, not only because the government was willing to use this force in such a shocking way, but also the reactions from the US government. I think that needs to be talked about. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the US Embassy statement in the immediate aftermath, and let's get into the role of US tax dollars in financing the police of Armenia.
The US statement was essentially in defense of the government. They started it off with saying that the protesters should behave in a legal, lawful manner. And then only in the second part, there was this brief mention of also the government should. So essentially, they both sided this. And this is just a clear indication that they are protecting their investment in Pashinyan regime, because they still have to derive all these important concessions from them. And we see these transformations occurring in almost every aspect of Armenian governments. It's essentially an American takeover. And how does this fit into the general fabric of the region? It doesn't concern them. And the fact that Armenia will be left with severely limited choices after these concessions done by Pashinyan's regime for generations to come is again not in the interest of the US Embassy. But regarding police reforms, recently I think a number was published about the millions of dollars that they spent on this reform, and this support is going to be continuous. And just an anecdote on an anecdotal level, every person that every visitor to Armenia that I have talked to, they're really surprised. They're surprised by the number of the police in the streets of Yerevan and how they essentially have nothing to do. And even one of my friends from France said that in France, you're just not allowed to have this police, this drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, wasting their time, and having all this noisy machine. So this is a very clear message, I think, from the American government, and this is just one part of their message. You should talk to us a little bit. You should mention a little bit all the other aspects of it, because you probably see it from the American side more, how they're really uplifting this regime.
Certainly. I mean, I think from my perspective, not only as an American, but also as a journalist who's been working in this region, in the Middle East for the past 10 years, there are countries where America supports the military and countries where America supports the police, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. There are also cases where, for example, in the case of Egypt and Israel, for example, or Lebanon and Israel, the Palestinian Authority and Israel, it's very clear that even in cases where the US government does give some support to the militaries of Egypt, Lebanon, the bigger picture is those countries will never reach parity with Israel, because Israel is our primary partner, and they're meant to be the hegemon. Whereas America gives significant funding in Lebanon to the police forces, as well as to the Palestinian Authority police forces. And I think that's a very salient case to Armenia's current situation, because I believe we're seeing a very similar model implemented here. Azerbaijan is being sort of anointed by the US and other NATO countries as the regional hegemon, as the military power, and getting, millions and millions of dollars in military assistance, training for their special forces, despite, and they're known, as we know from the war in Artsakh, for atrocities not only committed in Artsakh in 2020, again in 2022, during the invasion of the Republic of Armenia, which they continue to occupy. Whereas in the case of Armenia, the US support goes to the police, internal security forces. There is a whole new border guards force, which has been built. This is very much, a US supported project. And it is exactly these border guards that have been kind of swapped in the place of the Armenian military in very critical areas. And these border guards do not have the mandate of, the military. They are there for a very different purpose. And what, I think this kind of takes us to our next point, where the big picture here is that while it's being labeled as a crossroads of peace, that Armenia is moving towards, what's actually happening on the ground is a new east-west trade corridor that will go through Armenia. I believe O'Brien is either the deputy or the assistant secretary of state. He was recently speaking about this. He was asked by Armenian media, are you basically pushing for these concessions Azerbaijan wants, which is a corridor through Armenia? He said, well, we like to call it a trade passage. In the end, it's, you can call it what you want, but what is being implemented today in Armenia is a sort of West Bank situation, where the Armenian police are getting promoted as the primary force in the country that will be charged with protecting this new east-west trade route that connects Turkey, the West, to Azerbaijan and these Central Asian states that have traditionally been aligned more with Russia or the former Soviet Union. So I think this is the big picture. This is why, as you said, the US has made such a huge investment in this administration, because they also want to implement this project, whereas oppositional forces, including those who were protesting that day and were, repressed brutally, these people represent a force that wants Armenia to be sovereign, to not just be, a passageway for Turkey and Azerbaijan, and they have a very different goal than the U.S. has been trying to implement here. I think, we can also look at the recent statement by the State Department spokesman, who said that, Matt Miller, who said that, the two parties, meaning Armenia, Azerbaijan, have made incredible progress. They've come a long way. What we continue to do is push them. A peace agreement between those two countries would mean so much for those two countries and so much for the region, for peace, stability, security, We do think a deal is possible, but it requires both sides to make some difficult choices and tough compromises. So what we're going to do is continue to push them to resolve those final differences and reach an agreement. Nara, you've been on the ground this whole time. Tell the audience what has been going on in, where this latest opposition movement started in Tavush and Kirants. What is going on the ground? Are we seeing more stability? Put us in the picture.
Well, stability for whom is the real question, because in Kirants what we saw was just this unilateral concessions. There was only one post from which the Azerbaijani military had to move, and they of course refused. They stood their ground. So we have seen zero concessions on the Azerbaijani side. People of Kirants are in despair. Civil Contract recently, a couple of their MPs visited Kirants to show that everything is going great with delimitation process, and how, this is exactly according to the plan and how it's going to contribute to peace. And none of the inhabitants of the village agreed to take even photos or acknowledge this visit. So they did a fake photo shoot with the people that they brought in. This is according to one of the Kirants inhabitants. She is reporting on the ground. And she even said that they've been telling Kirants people that they should be happy that they're now building this new road, even though the school is just a few meters away from Azeri military. And recently, the Azerbaijani side, some of their soldiers, I guess, some of their military just walked in, and they were expecting there to be mines, so they were careful. And but of course, we had demined them.
Indeed, I think many will recall, and we reported on this, how those Armenian sappers, actually, some of them even lost their feet during the demining process so that the Azeris could move in. I don't think it even raises a question. It shows us this is not intended to be a crossroads. Armenian tradesmen are not going to be able to take advantage of this if the locals cannot even pass on the same roads as the Azeris. We also keep hearing that the government wants to open the road first between Turkey and Azerbaijan to nationals of third countries, so not Armenians. We can perhaps imagine that those will be Azeris.
Of course.
But, they never put it like this. It's always as a crossroads of peace that the East-West will be opened in tandem with the North-South. Maybe we should talk a little bit also, though, what we recently witnessed on the, this supposed North-South passageway on the border with Iran. Armenia, of course, has only 2 open borders with friendly countries, Georgia to the north, which leads to the Black Sea and onto Russian markets, and in the south with Iran, which of course leads all the way to Asia, and Iran also having oil and gas resources and being an important potential market, about the same size as Turkey. Why don't you talk a little bit about, what we recently witnessed on the Armenian border with Iran? What does it look like? How smooth is the passage? What is the highway like that we hear so much about, that they have been allegedly improving for this north-south transport route?
Well, coming back from Iran into Armenia was such a big trouble that we almost regretted coming back home, because there was no organization whatsoever. They made us wait twice the amount that they could have if they had just had a small organizational just system implemented. But clearly they were just so slow, and the people that were coming in, most of them were from Iran, tourists. They had to even camp out on the floor and wait, and some of the kids sleeping there. This was just really absurd. And we hear all these conversations about modernization of checkpoints, but it's so clear by how they behave toward those trying to cross the Mehri border that it's not a priority. And moreover, maybe they don't even want it to function for people, for tourists, or just in general, that they are really prioritizing East-West. Because the whole point of East-West is not to get this corridor. This is just the first step. Ultimately, Turkey is not going to trust Armenia to stay in its current direction that Pashinyan is propagating, a pro-Turkey Armenia. They know that it's not really sustainable on the long term. So what they want is to change the demographics of Syunik, of the south of Armenia. So they will have so much leverage that any attempt for Armenia to shift back to its, Russia and Iran south-north line will be thwarted by Turkey and Azerbaijan. What they're pushing for is just endless leverage, and this is just one aspect of it. And also a lot of the Iranian truckers that we interviewed, they mentioned how they've been really mistreated on this Goris-Kapan road that is now effectively under Azeri control, and Armenians gave it away without a single bullet. Without even mentioning anything.
Yes, this was post the 2020 war, and this was an event that really has never been adequately explained, I think, to the public, why the Goris-Kapan road was handed over to the Azeris. The Iranians had offered assistance. Armenia said this is Azeri territory, essentially. Now that road is fully under Azeri control, and not only Armenian truckers, but Iranian truckers are not able to pass through there on their way to Yerevan. So this is another indication that this talk of connectivity
is for Azeris.
Is for Azeris, essentially. It's for the East-West. They have to include the North-South as kind of to basically, I think, paper over what's really happening. What we witnessed on the Armenia-Iran border was that now these new border guards are the face that you see when you come across. And rather than being more effective, what we witnessed was a total, basically just a choke point. People were not processed in an orderly fashion. Elderly people, children, everyone was waiting for 6 hours to pass simply through the no man's land after passing through the Iranian checks, but that no man's land before entering Armenia. People were waiting 6 hours. Many of them had come for Vartavar, for tourism. With the currency situation in Iran, probably had, saved their money for this holiday, and we saw there were no restrooms, there was no water available, no benches for elderly people or children. It was really a sight to behold, and in the end, there was no queues. Instead, everyone was just kind of forming an onion ring of lines around various windows, which would open and close, almost teasing people well into the night, into 2 a.m., 3 a.m., to finally be herded into one massive room where it looked like a mosh pit, and we actually waited for hours to avoid going in so to not be crushed. So this is the situation, the current situation on the border with Iran. It's disturbing to see this total lack of care for the country, probably the only country that has been outspoken about red lines on Armenia's sovereign territory. Not only that, but has expressed concern about demographic change, because as we know, Azerbaijan has publicly stated they want Azeris to, quote, return to Western Azerbaijan, which is how they refer to Armenia. And they've already formed lists of people that they're pushing to be allowed to, quote, resettle in Armenia. So we can see where this is going. This is going in a direction where, Armenians will be, concentrated around Yerevan. Azeris, if this government continues in its current functions, will be settled in Syunik, in areas where the Azeris are gaining control of the roads, are gaining concessions, where they are the only ones that are allowed to go on these roads. They will form communities, and little by little, they will turn Armenia into kind of a West Bank, which will be very inhospitable for Armenians. And we have a situation where the current authorities of Armenia are implementing this. And I think this is really the big picture that people watching need to understand. And I think it's also important that our audience in the diaspora understands that when Armenians choose another path, whether it's through peacefully protesting or at the ballot box, the current authorities have so many administrative resources and so much international backing on their side that that change is rendered impossible. Why don't you talk a little bit about what's happening with the elected mayor of Vanadzor?
The elected mayor of Vanadzor has been finally released. He was a political prisoner for, I think, almost 3 years. And this is just a clear abuse of pre-trial detention that we see all over the place, that people, their guilt is not proven. And instead of adhering to the innocent until guilty rule, they just get imprisoned and have to wait for years and waste years from their lives. And then suddenly, one day, they're released, but still, the case is ongoing. They can't leave the country. They can't be, in there, because this is the elected mayor, so he should be the now mayor. But it seems to me like anywhere that the opposition wins. In Alaverdi, we saw that in Vartanis, you just can't win because a civil contract will just arrest whoever wins from the opposition. Doesn't matter what charges. And then they will just put their own person in charge. This is just...
And just to put our audience in the picture, Mamikon Aslanyan was elected mayor of Vanadzor, Armenia's third largest city, in December 2021. He beat Nikol Pashinyan's party candidate, and almost immediately after, he was arrested on spurious charges. Those have yet to come to any conclusion, and yet the city is now, of course, governed by the ruling party because their mayor has been taken offline. He just was released on bail on Monday, but he's still in a very tenuous situation, and, nearly 3 years have gone by, and it's resulted in Nikol Pashinyan's party being able to basically suppress the will of the voters. I think we should also mention a couple other cases that show it's not even just politicians that are being taken offline like this, but also military figures and activists, regular people. I think we should mention the case of Major General Grigory Khachaturov. He was the commander of the 3rd Army Corps of Armenia, which is responsible for this northeastern region of Tavush, which has been the focal point of these protests, or where they began. He had given orders, as we now know, for forces not to retreat, not to give up any positions. Tavush was one of the areas with the best defended positions in Armenia, and also which basically ensures the security of Armenia's pipeline, which comes via Georgia from Russia, and where Armenia is able to secure the cheapest prices on gas outside of Russia and Belarus, which is in a union state with Russia. So a very critical energy infrastructure. Grigory Khachaturov, after giving this order post-war, was detained, again on ridiculous charges that have yet to have been backed up by any real evidence, and yet he sits in house arrest until today, even as the government gives away these very positions that he and his men defended. I think we should also mention Samvel Vardanyan. Why don't you talk a little bit about his case and who he is?
Samvel Vardanyan is a participant of the 44-day war, and he was an activist starting from the 2020 capitulation agreement. He was always, protesting, always making his voice heard. And one time they detained him for just calling Nikol Pashinyan a davajan on the street, which again, we have no respective law for this, like offending Nikol Pashinyan, like an official, is not really criminalized in Armenia. It's not illegal in any way. So the second incident was when he met one of the civil contract MPs, and he again started, blaming them for the giveaway of Artsakh and essentially for this last years of misery and pain that the party has brought to Armenia. And then after they detained him,
You're talking about the most recent case, correct? Yes. So by met, this was by chance.
Yes.
Just on a bus, he happened to see this man. This was a peaceful interaction. He did not, do anything physical. He simply gave this man a piece of his mind. He had his phone in his hand, just to show his side of the story. And as you said, he immediately they came after him.
And then Nikol Pashinyan's paper wrote about how they should really treat him with, how they should be violent toward him, how he should be punished, about all these things. And I think Alen Simonian, the current president of the National Assembly, he also commented on this case about how Samvel must be severely punished.
And indeed, after that incident occurred, the police came to Samvel's house. They took him while he was in police custody on his way to the prison. He was actually tortured. He was brutalized. He was, according to his account, which I believe he gave to the human rights lawyer Ruben Milikian, who held an emergency press conference afterward, he said that in this police custody, he was strangled, he was cursed at. When he wasn't cooperating, saying what they wanted him to say, he was actually even threatened with sodomy. So this is how comfortable the authorities feel treating just a regular person who speaks his mind to them, and how much of a threat they see this free speech as. Samvel was released into house arrest, but he cannot speak. His voice has been silenced. He can't, walk around. He can't even operate, I believe, his Airbnb account, which he needs to rent out his place. So this is another, and we can talk about many cases where the government is also trying to punish people's livelihood when they speak out. We've seen it in the case of the authorities going after Gigi, the ride-sharing app. We've seen it recently with Anna Hagopian's foundation sending letters to big businesses telling them what she expects of them to donate to her foundation. So we're really living in this kind of mafia situation where if you're not playing by their rules, if you're not giving them, extortion money, or if you're speaking your mind, you will be punished, whether you're just a regular guy like Samvel, whether you're a military figure like Grigory Khachaturov, or whether you're an elected official. So this is our situation, and I think this is what, the diaspora often doesn't have access to this information. It's scattered here and there. The daily news cycle is filled with so much going on that it's very hard to keep up on all of these developments. But this is what the population of Armenia is up against on a daily basis if they want to even think to try to challenge these authorities. So it's a very daunting situation.
Yes, some people in the diaspora, when they ask me, okay, why won't people come out in even larger masses? Why won't they dissent? I tell them that the price of dissent is very, very high in Armenia now. Back before, in Serge Sarkisyan's times, when you would even get detained, all these international organizations, they would send so many people. You were constantly monitored. You felt their support. They were interviewing before, interviewing you after, making sure you were not even mistreated in any way. But now it seems like a lot of these police are given this complete impunity to act with violence against those who oppose civil contract party. And nothing is sacred. Even they beat up many clergymen and people that were literally, wearing their clergyman clothes recently when Sirpazan's protests were ongoing. And this is just a big problem for anybody that wants to oppose Nikol Pashinyan's regime. And in the 90s too, we had a similar case where Levon Ter-Petrosyan, his administration was likewise very violent, and the police again had impunity. So it's a return, in a sense, to those times.
I think maybe I should turn it to you. Perhaps you have some questions. Put me on the spot, since it's been it's been since February that I had been in Armenia. I was in Boston these past months. I'm curious if you have any questions.
What's it like? Is it any different? How's life in Yerevan versus?
I think the first thing I noticed, and until now it's very anecdotal, but we're starting to see, and I hear from friends especially that are living in Gentron, in the downtown of Yerevan, complaining about electricity cuts and water cuts. It's not on an organized basis. It doesn't seem to be announced. It just sort of happens. It's until now, it seems a bit sporadic, but it's unmistakable that this is happening. I had my first water cut yesterday, and it's very concerning because, this makes me think of Lebanon, where I was based for many years, where the state, just has totally relinquished any sense of responsibility toward its citizens, and it's really just a state of anarchy where you have to, and it's all privatized. You need to have water delivered. You need to put solar panels. You need to get a generator. There's huge amounts of pollution. If this continues like this, and we start seeing whether scheduled power and water cuts or just, arbitrary cuts, it's going to make it very difficult for Armenia to, build itself back up from all the country has seen. And it's also going to make it very hard for the most vulnerable people. As you know, we have 150,000 or more refugees from Artsakh. We have a huge movement of people from border areas or new border areas, places that are now totally insecure because of the land giveaways, the position giveaways, are finding themselves within view of Azeri flags and posts. These people are trying to move to Yerevan for safety, stability, and not only them, diasporans who might want to have been thinking about investing in Armenia, who love Armenia, who want to do business here. It's also going to make them think twice about buying property anywhere beyond the Yerevan and its outskirts, or maybe even in Yerevan if there's going to be these types of shortages. There's been interruptions of internet I believe it was, what's the name of the telecom company even announced. They said the problem is from Kirants. Yes. It's from this area where, as we know, a key internet cable passes through via Georgia. And now it seems that, that cable, its location, is in danger. The internet connection is in danger. The water of Artsakh is now not accessible to Armenia. There are key water sources that are now under Azeri control and could, impact our drinking water here. They could cut water, they could poison water. As we know from the case of Artsakh, they really don't feel any limits when it comes to pressuring Armenia. We keep hearing talk about peace. We keep hearing this sort of Orwellian language, war is peace, etc. But on the ground, we're living a totally different reality. Many people see it. I think many people don't want to think about it until it comes to them. But this is another place where diasporans who ask, oh, but how could it get this far? I say, the average person has very limited ability to impact the situation. So it's very concerning. But on the flip side, I'm hopeful that this will be a wake-up call to those who thought that they could be insulated from everything happening outside of the capital, that this is going to come to them, it's going to affect all of us, and will indeed even affect the diaspora, because the diaspora needs Armenia to be strong, to exist, in order to keep going and to have kind of a center point, to have this foundation to continue the Armenian culture.
And to your point about how people sometimes they don't complain or act like it's fine, this is true. And even when we had Artsakh blockade, a lot of people, when they were talking to their relatives and their friends, they will just pretend like everything is fine because they want to seem tough, they don't want to be complainers. But what does it matter if on this individual level people are like, yes, Azeris are 5 meters away, but it's fine, we're standing our ground. What's the point of this if in the end what happens is the siege results in this shelling, in this attack, in this invasion, and you pretend to be tough, but in reality, if your government is against you, you're not going to be able to hold any positions, hold any land. And where are these people now, right? It doesn't matter if you're tough, if you're not tough. It's much better if there are organizers on the ground, maybe Sarpazan movement can do this, that tell these people, you need to demand more, you need to demand safety. You cannot just be coping and acting tough just because you think it's going to somehow be fine again. Because this is not the Armenian Bacht, the Armenian plight. This is just a series of problems. And the government and the people are completely disconnected. The people know they can't go to the government for anything, especially safety, because what they encounter is mockery and they encounter all these manipulations. Even if they directly meet with Nikol Pashinyan, it ends in nothing but tears. And villagers of Kirants can testify to that.
And I think that's a good point to end on. I think we should talk about, what is the current status of the civic movement in Armenia. What I've seen is that, in the aftermath of this brutal repression, it's been quite interesting to see how Archbishop Bagrat Galstanian has taken this time before the start of the school year, before the fall. He's basically doing grassroots political work, from what I see. He's visiting all of these areas that were, seen before as perhaps sympathetic to the ruling authorities. In Tavush, many people voted for Pashinyan in the snap elections in 2021. he's going to these areas where the people feel abandoned, where they've been demeaned, mocked, told, oh, we'll get used to this, you can do business, it's gonna, what's your problem? He's going, spending time with these people, talking to them, listening to them, working with them, trying to elevate the consciousness, and essentially building grassroots support. What is the next step? I think that, as fast moving as all these events are on the ground, as concerning as all the steps these authorities are taking, there's really no, I think, way to get around these hard, long work of talking to people all over the country, different ages, women, men, elderly, children, border areas, people who, had put their faith in the current authorities, who had believed these promises, who had really put, sincere hopes.
We're gonna deoccupy Hadrut?
Exactly. I think that this is what I see happening right now. I see work that really hasn't been done before in a systematic way. And it's being done, and there's just simply no shortcuts at this point from what I can see in Armenia to turn the situation around. But what I do see is that people still are living here, even Artsakh refugees, despite all of the problems they're encountering. The people from Artsakh I meet, they want to keep their culture. They want to stay in the homeland, if at all possible. And I'm not just talking about Artsakh refugees, but all Armenians are trying to find ways. So I think as an outlet based in the diaspora, we need to basically focus on elevating our consciousness about what's happening, putting people in touch with the homeland. And I hope that, this is what we can really focus on in the days, weeks to come, showing these stories, showing these views, and getting our audience really to feel like they know the pulse of what's happening in Armenia.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Nari, for this conversation. And thank you all for tuning in. Please, again, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Facebook and Instagram pages, and Twitter, so you can keep up to date on all of our content that we'll be putting out. Thank you all.